Take it from me, a bona fide film lover, DC's film scene is super underrated. And we've got the DC Environmental Film Festival coming up March 19th through 28th at venues across the DMV. The lineup includes over 50 programs, including many free ones. This year's theme is Against the Current, dedicated to amplifying the unwavering voices of those who press on in defense of our planet, even in the face of significant challenges. Catch the Leonardo DiCaprio-produced Yanuni, which follows an indigenous chief from the Brazilian Amazon who survived 6 assassination attempts to become Brazil's first Secretary of Indigenous Rights, the DC premiere of the Sundance Award winner Nuisance Bear, and several family-friendly picks like The Last Whale Singer. Learn more and get tickets at dceff.org. That's dceff.org.
Today on CityCast DC, more than almost any local industry, dining is reliant on a workforce that does not always have the legal status to work here, which means that the recent hints of a new round of federal enforcement could have a big impact, not just on the affected employees, but also on the businesses themselves and on the universe of people who enjoy our city's dining scene. Tim Carman of the Washington Post has been following the news. He's here to explain what it means for the workforce, for the restaurants, and for you. Today is Monday, March 16th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC's talking about. Tim Carman, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So you recently wrote about restaurants losing employees thanks to DHS and ICE stepping up enforcement and raids and alerts. You start off with this story about one particular restaurant downtown. Can you just paint the picture of what they went through?
Yeah, of course. So the idea here is that, back last spring, DHS sent agents to various restaurants around DC. They apparently targeted about 190. And what they were doing was providing a notice of inspection letter. And that requires the restaurants to provide the list of documents and information sheets that they have on all employees. And then once DHS gets those documents, it will compare it against information in its own database to verify that these workers are authorized to work in the United States. So that apparently took 9 months to do. And so what they started getting were these letters, these enforcement letters from DHS, specifically from the Homeland Security. And these letters literally list the names of the employees who they cannot verify as authorized to work. And so the first restaurant that I wrote about, a fairly popular downtown restaurant.
And just to be clear, they don't want to be named.
They don't want to be named. They don't want to put a further target on their back. But they had 32 of 46 employees mentioned as not being apparently authorized. And so the restaurant has, some options, a couple of options. They can protest each of these and provide new documentation that might prove their authorization, or they could fire them. And in the case of this restaurant, the owner either terminated or the employees left, 29 of the 32. So that just decimated the restaurant. We're talking servers, bartenders, line cooks, prep cooks, every part of the operations. They've had to find immediate replacements or try to figure out what else they could do.
And so using this restaurant as a case study, what was the effect? So you lose all these employees. What is the effect? You obviously you have to scramble to hire new ones. What does that do to the bottom line?
So in this particular example, I think it's a very well considered, well reviewed restaurant, and the owner is respected, I think, among workers in DC. And so he said that some of his former workers who either got fired or left recommended new workers to him. And so he was fairly quickly able to replace 17 of the 29. I think that helped him keep the restaurant open without too much, too many factors affecting the experience that you'd have in the dining room, whether it's a shortened menu or fewer servers, anything that can cause people to leave a bad Yelp review. But he was still short, and it required him and his partner to step up. Like his partner literally had to go work downstairs in the prep kitchen, peeling potatoes, chopping vegetables, getting ready for the day. And this is not what owners typically do.
Right. The idea is that this sort of thing, which was first previewed, 9 months ago, is expected to be on the uptick now.
Yeah. So, trying to get owners to talk about this right now in this particular period, it's very tough. They obviously don't want to have further attention put on them by, immigration officials. So when I first heard of these enforcement letters coming out in late February, I started immediately calling various restaurants. And, some said they didn't get letters. I would say most of the people I called said they had not received letters, but I did confirm either through the owners or their attorneys that 7 restaurants, at least 7, had received letters. And that had translated into 131 workers either leaving the job or being terminated. And what a couple of immigration attorneys told me is that it's very, very likely that all 190 restaurants that received inspection notices back in the spring will receive a letter eventually, that this was just the tip of the iceberg. So 130 workers right now, but this could end up having a much larger impact on the restaurant labor force, which is already really tight. I mean, COVID hurt the labor force in restaurants significantly. People didn't want to work in restaurants, felt very unsafe, and were also just kind of over the sort of work hours and the hard work of dealing with the public. And they've never quite recovered from that. And this puts an even larger pressure, I think, on the industry. And it'll be interesting to see if this tactic that DC seems to be the first city to experience will, roll out into other cities. I think the speculation is high that it will.
So have you spoken to any of the folks who quit or resigned or were terminated?
So I have not. I mean, they're all very shy about talking to the press. Even if we grant them anonymity, it's very difficult. There is one that I've been trying really hard to get a hold of because he was detained and he was put in a unit up in Baltimore where I understand he barely was fed for 3 days.
What about the restaurateurs? Have you spoken with any of them?
I have. They're very concerned. They're concerned that they won't find replacements. They're concerned that it could happen to them in the near future. Basically, they're concerned about their livelihood. This could have like a devastating effect on their ability to operate a restaurant as they conceived it.
Don't miss Folger Theater's As You Like It, playing now through April 12th at the Folger Shakespeare Library. Envisioned by artistic director Karen Ann Daniels and directed by Timothy Douglas, this production of Shakespeare's comedy offers a love note to DC, imbuing the Forest of Arden with the familiar vibes, culture, and characters that mark the district as a resilient and redemptive place of belonging. Featuring choreography from Tony Thomas of Folger Theater's Helen Hayes Award-winning production of Metamorphoses, and original music by Grammy Award nominee Kokai, don't miss this take on Shakespeare's playful and musical comedy. Tickets start at $20 and can be purchased online at folger.edu or by phone at 202-544-7077. Get yours today.
Life can change faster than DC seasons. One moment, everything feels normal, and next, your world is turned upside down. So don't let someone else's mistake ruin your spring. call the team you can count on. NACE Law Group has been standing up for DC families for decades, fighting for neighbors hurt by medical malpractice, wrongful death, and serious injuries. They don't just settle quickly or push papers. They dig in, fight hard, and make sure every client gets the justice they deserve. And here is something that I love. They are a longtime supporter of CityCast because just like us, they really care about this community and the folks who call it home. So if you or someone that you care about has been hurt, don't wait. Call NACE Law Group. They'll stand with you, fight for your family, and make sure your rights are protected so that you can focus on what matters most.
So I guess the question would be, like, they are employers in the United States, and under our law, you're supposed to only hire workers who have permission to work here. And the government has the power to investigate this. So leaving aside the kind of thuggish Trump administration behavior of like showing up in tactical gear to deliver these notices that you could have emailed, isn't this like what the law is supposed to say? Like, weren't these restaurateurs supposed to be hiring people who have permission to work?
Yeah, of course. Some immigration attorneys will tell you that, it's really not right or fair that we have thrown worker authorization onto employers. But this is the state of the industry. They have to gather this paperwork, and the paperwork can include driver's license, birth certificates, passport, green card, work visa, any number of documents that prove both that, their identity and that they're authorized to work in this country. Now, the responsibility of the employer is to gather these documents and to give them a look at and just kind of eyeball whether or not they look legit. They are not required to check it against any government database. So there, as you can imagine, the undocumented worker community is very savvy. And there is a cottage industry for producing false documents. So a lot of these documents that restaurant owners are looking at look legit. And unless they are enrolled in a program like E-Verify, they won't be able to tell if they're fake or legitimate documents.
I guess what I'm saying is, like, when I read what you wrote and listen to what you say, my first assumption is that this loss of 130 workers with untold numbers to follow is yet another kick in the teeth to a restaurant industry that has been really struggling. And I, as a Washingtonian who likes to go out to eat and who wants the city to have a vibrant, diverse, creative restaurant scene, should feel like it's a bad thing when our restaurant industry gets kicked in the teeth. But that also raises a sort of uncomfortable question that my pleasure as a diner is dependent on illegality, on the mass employing of people who are outside the law and not authorized to work.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, some people are really upset by the idea that restaurants use undocumented workers to provide a sort of level of luxury that, wealthier people enjoy. Typically wealthier people tend to enjoy.
But like an economist would say, well, isn't the answer to just, if they're having a hard time finding workers, to just pay more and then pass that cost on to the bougie swells who are dining?
Right. I mean, that's one option, right? The model of the restaurant industry has often relied on undocumented labor. I think that's a safe thing to say. It's often been perceived as a pathway towards citizenship. You enter the country, however you do, and you find a job, you work it for many years, and you find a pathway towards citizenship. There's some great stories out in the restaurant world of undocumented workers who've, really worked very hard and have ended up becoming owners themselves. So I think it's like one path that undocumented workers has seen towards realizing this idea, the American dream. And so, yeah, historically, that has been the pattern of restaurants. Could they break it by raising prices to the point that others might be interested in that kind of labor? That is a question that a lot of people will say no. Like, it won't you cannot find enough people to do the hard, sweaty, laborious work of being a line cook in a kitchen. Critics will often say, well, these line cooks, these barbacks, these busboys, they are, just working at terrible wages and being exploited. And on some level, that could be true. But at another level, I think if you talk to these workers, they will tell you that they're being paid. The minimum wage in DC is $17.50 per hour. It's not a bad wage. It's not perhaps a livable wage, but it's not a bad wage. And others are being paid much more than that. I think line cooks these days, given the labor shortage, are being paid in the mid 20s, low to mid 20s, and you're starting to look at a respectable salary. So it's hard to exactly label this as exploitation. I think the workers would tell you that they're choosing these jobs, they're keeping these jobs, they support their families, and they want these jobs.
But what it is sort of outside the four corners of the law, apparently. And that is, as we know, as journalists, people who have some power and some ability to not face consequence will exploit that power. But on the matter of whether we will continue to live in a city that has a vibrant, creative, interesting, fun, and affordable to regular people dining scene, who's going to replace the workers who have gone away and are going to go away?
It's a real open question right now. If it gets worse, these workers are going to flee to safer jurisdictions.
But what I think I hear you saying is that if Washington is the first, it won't be the last, and other jurisdictions may not be safer for long.
I think that's the general idea. I heard a comment that didn't make it into the story from one of the immigration attorneys that the motivation here from the government may be twofold, maybe trying to get rid of illegal workers in the restaurant industry, but also to get these restaurants to climb on board with the DHS program called E-Verify, which is one way that restaurants can, by and large, figure out if their workforce is authorized. It's not a perfect system. People will tell you it has flaws.
You used an amazing example in your piece of its flaws.
Right. Like the partner of the main restaurant I featured in the story, he was not authorized according to E-Verify, even though he had been naturalized years eyears. And, I've heard similar stories from other people. So it's not a perfect system, but it's significantly better than, just eyeballing documents to see if they're legitimate. But, I think the other point you're bringing up here is is this going to really hurt the DC restaurant industry? Is it going to, cause people to give pause on whether or not they should continue operating in DC or even open a restaurant in DC? And I think that is a real legitimate question. I have talked to numerous restaurant owners who are either fed up with dealing with DC and all its, issues, whether it's increased labor costs, National Guard on the street, tariffs, what have you. They're tired of it and they want to go somewhere else, or they just won't open up here because it's too costly.
What's the downside for restaurants of signing up for E-Verify?
Well, the main downside is it doesn't necessarily mean that their workers are safe, that they have hired authorized workers. And, I think right now they're all very worried about having a labor force that could be cut in half or more in, just a matter of days if they receive an enforcement letter. So they could end up paying some money for E-Verify and still getting workers flagged by the government. It's sort of a lose-lose situation, costing them more money and not necessarily protecting other workers.
So I know you talk to people at the Restaurant Association, sort of attorneys who represent the industry writ large. What are their expectations for what the next shoes are that are going to drop, or the next jackboots?
They're worried. They're trying to attack it from a policy point of view. they're, I know, having conversations with people in the federal government to try to maybe figure out a carve out for workers who have been here many years, a pathway towards citizenship, something that would not target the kind of people that I think even most Trump voters didn't think would be targeted. Like, I think a lot of people who voted for Trump, 2024, thought he would go after the most violent criminals. And, the workers that he's targeting in the restaurant industry are not those. And so, yeah, I think there's a real concern here that we'll see like fewer workers, fewer restaurants, fewer openings than we had before.
And your contention is even if they raised prices to like $100 an hour for a busboy, they would not be able to find those.
Well, maybe at $100 an hour, I'd quit my job and go be a busboy.
Well, right, but you also wouldn't be. You also wouldn't be going out to dinner anymore.
Well, true, but I think the idea is twofold. If you paid like a living wage for a lot of these jobs, the price of dinner is going to be so high that you're going to lose a large percentage of your customers. There's already considerable angst among Washingtonians about how much a dinner for two costs. It's a lot of money. And, we're even looking at wages that are still being subsidized by the tip credit, which is a whole other issue. But so, if suddenly the full price of a meal reflected, labor costs that were more compatible with a living wage, you're talking a very expensive dinner. And there is a point which consumers just stop going. And whatever that pain threshold is, restaurateurs are very acutely aware of what it is. And so that's one issue. Like, you can only raise the price of a meal to a certain point without causing serious damage to your bottom line. The second part is, like, there doesn't seem to be a labor force just willing to step into these roles. The type of worker required to do restaurant, back of the house work, it's a really disciplined, serious worker. And you can't have some college, flunky looking to gain, a few hours doing the kind of labor in the back of the house. This is skilled labor. And the workers that are there have been doing it for years, and they are completely prized by the restaurant owners. Like, it's not easy to find that skill set at almost any price point. And you're not going to get it by, hiring some recent graduates from a culinary school. It's like line cooks, they are a unique employer, a unique worker in the back of the house. Their skill set is extremely rare, and they're the type that every restaurant needs, and without looking to maybe have every one of them wanting to be the sous chef or the chef de cuisine or the expediter. You just need these kind of day-to-day workers who put together every meal. And they're hard to find.
And I think one of the things that comes out in your reporting and in our conversations is this, that if you listen to sort of MAGA diehards or, doctrinaire economists, restaurants are full of people who are being paid 72 cents an hour because they have no choice, because otherwise someone will blow the whistle on them. But what you're painting is a picture of a highly prized workforce where, if nothing else, you could take your skills from one restaurant to another because you are much sought after.
There have been line cooks who, for $1 more per hour, will leave a job they've held for years. So they are prized positions. Now, are there examples of workers being treated very poorly and paid very poorly because the owners hold their immigration status over their head? I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure there are. Are most of them the sort of like mid to high tier restaurant that you see in DC? I don't think so. Like if you have that reputation in this town, you're not going to keep workers.
Tim, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Michael.
Shout out to our new members, Ben O. and Jonathan W. Thank you. If you also want to become a CityCast member, head to membership.citycast.fm. Members get ad-free listening, exclusive members events, and a special events-only newsletter. It's $10 a month or $100 for the year. Again, that's membership.citycast.fm. All right, that is all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and for heaven's sake, subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.